So hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Yuki Hub Crawl 2022. I'm Sam from Yuki, and I'll be your host for today's event. This is actually date 5, as the number says over my right shoulder, number 5 out of a 12-date virtual tour. In fact, the first 8 dates are going to be virtual in the Hub Crawl this year. And then when we get to April, we will take the show on the road and go around various locations in the UK with some physical events at last. So this is 5 of 8 of virtual, another 4 to follow when we get out to physical events. Look forward to that. If you want to find out more details about other events on the Hub Crawl, please go to yuki.org.uk to find out all the dates and locations. Now, today's event is being recorded. A video link will be sent to you afterwards, along with all of the relevant slides, and they'll be with you in the next couple of days. Now, today, we encourage you to ask questions. Feel free to do so. You've got a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you just pop your questions in there, I will get them asked to our speakers today. And if there's not enough time to cover them during the sessions, they will answer them in text format afterwards in the Q&A. So put anything you want to ask in the Q&A. And today's theme is the how and the what for blockchain and NFT and the games industry. And like all Yuki Hub Crawl events, this is an opportunity to hear from experts on the hot topics of the industry today. And it doesn't get hotter than this, I don't think, at the moment. And hopefully you'll be given useful information to help you make informed business decisions. Our first speaker today is Peter Lewin from Wiggin. So Peter, if you can put your camera and video on, we will kick off with you. And then we'll have, let me remove the pin from me so that we can get on to you. And then we'll have Tom and James from Helicon NFT afterwards. David Amor's joining us from Playmint to do a talk, and then we'll have a panel, Dave Ranyard and Ed Mason, to end us off today. But we're going to start, as I said, with Peter. So how are you doing, Peter? You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. Thank you very much. Excited to talk about NFTs and law.
NFTs and law. Am I allowed to say you're an upgrade? Because we had one of your colleagues lined up, and you were dropped in at the last minute.
Well, I mean, Paul isn't here, so I mean, you can definitely say
what I want. Yeah. Well, lovely.
Exactly.
Appreciate you stepping in and looking after this for us. So I will mute myself, turn my video off, and hand over to you.
Cool. Thanks. I'm just gonna share some slides. I hope you can see them. Is that okay? Is that cool?
I can see your slides perfectly. Yeah, full screen. Thank you.
Awesome.
Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, and thanks, Yuki, for hosting me and giving me the chance to talk about legal and regulatory stuff around games and NFTs and games. So real quick bit about me. My name is Pete Lewin. I'm a senior associate at Wiggin in the games and esports teams. I've been a video games lawyer my entire professional career, and I work with game developers, publishers, tech providers, esports companies, and influencers across a whole range of commercial stuff, IP, and regulatory. So blockchain and NFTs fits nicely within IP and that regulatory work. So really briefly, you can see on the slide what we're going to cover today. Obviously, the most important bit on why you're here listening to me, as opposed to all these other great speakers, which we'll come to later, Section 3, legal and regulatory bits. So what is an NFT? I don't want to sit here and tell anyone how to suck eggs, and I really don't want to rehash old news. You probably all know tons about NFTs, but I don't want to assume any prior knowledge. So an NFT is a non-fungible token. It's a unique digital asset that exists on a blockchain, of which there are many different blockchains. And the NFT itself, it's really a link or a bit of data that usually links to an underlying asset somewhere else. And that asset could be a digital image like the bored apes you're seeing at the bottom here, or it could theoretically be something in the real world like a car or a piece of artwork. It could be tons of stuff. But it's quite an important distinction to make that when we're talking about an NFT, we are really talking about the piece of code and the metadata and not really the underlying asset. And I'll come back to this question around ownership later. So NFTs and games, I've kind of tried to put these into a few different buckets on the screen here as to how I'm kind of seeing them deployed in games at the moment, and this could change. And just important to note that these aren't how they're classified from a regulatory point of view. This is purely in my mind how I like to think of them. So you've got the collectibles, which are really NFTs that don't really have any in-game utilization. It could be something just like an NFT of a piece of artwork or a game screenshot. And a good example is Konami with their Castlevania Anniversary NFTs. You've got item NFTs, so that's usually something with in-game utility, like a game weapon or a character or a piece of in-game land or a skin. And there's tons of examples of those. You've got Ubisoft with their helmets and their in-game guns in Ghost Recon. You've got the collectible cards in Splinterlands. You've got the Axes in Axie Infinity, and you've got Decentraland with their plots of in-game land. And then you've got this third bucket, this governance and utility tokens, which actually quite often aren't NFTs, but they're usually just some other form of crypto asset. But these are usually tokens that have some sort of rights attached to them or give you certain access within a game or service. So that could be like access to a game, or it could give you voting rights in a decision, something called a DAO, which I'm not going to have time to get into, but you could be given rights to vote in how games are run. So some quite cool potentials there. So now on the screen here, obviously there's like a lot of discussion going on around NFTs, and I've tried to put down what some of the main threads around the potential pros are, as well as some of the potential cons. I'm really not here to advocate for or against NFTs in games. That's not my role, but I do think it's really important for anyone considering to like implement NFTs within games to think obviously about the legal and regulatory aspect. That's the most important part to me, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff to think about here as well. So really do look at the bigger entire picture. I don't have time to get into all of these here, but if you've got any questions about any of them, shoot me a line, put a question down below. So legal and regulatory challenges. Well, the short answer is it's really complicated, and it's complicated because some NFT projects are really complicated, and they can throw up such a wide range of issues that it's sometimes quite difficult to either begin identifying the issues and then to start sifting through them to figure out which ones you prioritize, which ones are the most important things you actually have to consider now. That said, I've tried to put them into 4 buckets here of things that I'm going to be talking through, the first of which is financial regulation. It's the first thing to note with financial regulation, which obviously isn't a topic that a lot of games businesses are used to dealing with. But the important thing to note is that it's really different all around the world. And that's true with a lot of laws, like most laws differ around the world, but particularly when it comes to financial regulation. So what might be okay in one territory might not be okay at all in a different territory, or something might be okay in both territories, but there might be subtle but really important differences about how you can, say, advertise something. So in the UK, I've put on the slide here some of the buckets, the areas of financial regulation that might be applicable to businesses, games businesses, depending on what part of the, let's just call it the NFT ecosystem that they are operating in. So, for example, investment regulation, which talks a lot about securities, that might be applicable to every single company operating within the ecosystem that in any way touches an NFT if it's classified as a security. Whereas money laundering stuff might be more applicable if you're operating a crypto exchange or if you're operating a crypto wallet. So again, different things apply to different players in the industry. So looking at investment regulation in the UK, this is regulated by the FCA, and the FCA has essentially lumped all of crypto assets into 4 categories at the moment. And those categories are exchange tokens, utility tokens, e-money, and security tokens. And right now, only those last 2 are regulated by the FCA, the e-money and the securities, whereas exchange and utility aren't regulated by the FCA. So just to take a step back, utility tokens are usually, as the name suggests, something which gives you utility, which could be, for example, access to a product or a service, or maybe an in-game feature. Whereas a security, that's usually something which starts smelling and looking more like a share in a company. It might carry certain rights and obligations. it might be used for capital raising purposes, it might give you an entitlement to revenue of a particular project. So utility, unregulated, securities, regulated. And where a lot of the things that games businesses are doing right now, which bucket it would fit into, is a really quite complicated question. And it's made no easier by the fact that the FCA have said that a token can be many different types of asset throughout the course of its life cycle. So something could be a utility token as well as a security token at the same time, or maybe one becomes the other. So it's quite challenging. So if you're doing a games project and you're issuing tokens that start smelling, looking like securities, you need to pay extra attention there, because if you are dealing with regulated securities, then a bunch of other stuff like financial promotion rules start kicking in. Okay, so that's financial regulation. Intellectual property. So the first thing I've got here is ownership. And that's because a lot of the times when people say they're buying NFTs, they go, oh, this is great, I get to own things. I get ownership of what I have bought. But a lot of the times I think that's quite misleading language, because when you're buying an NFT, you're not really buying the underlying asset to which the NFT is connected. You might just be buying that specific digital copy of that asset, or not at all. So a lot of the times what is happening is the creator of the NFT will retain the ownership, the copyright in the underlying asset, and they will only give the buyer a very limited set of rights and permissions to do things with that NFT. Quite a lot of the times that's restricted to reselling the NFT, or maybe using it for very limited commercial or non-commercial purposes. So ownership is perhaps not the most clear term that we could be using there, at least from a legal point of view. So setting out in your terms of service what the ownership position is and what buyers can and can't do with your NFTs, super important. On terms of service themselves, you definitely need to have these. I think there's a really big question at the moment regarding incorporation of those terms of service into the user flow at the moment. So you might be familiar that when you boot up a lot of games, you'll click to accept the terms of service and maybe their privacy policy. And that's kind of what gets the binding acceptance to that very important legal contract. But I could go out and I could buy an NFT on a third-party marketplace for a game that I've never even booted up. And I could potentially buy that NFT and never really have agreed to the terms of service or the terms binding that NFT. Yes, they're on a website, but have I agreed to them? So I think incorporation of terms and conditions into the kind of user flow and purchase of NFTs is going to be a really important thing, and a quite big challenge in my opinion. Third-party content. Short story here is if you're making NFTs that feature any third-party content, that could be image rights, it could be music, it could be artwork. Make sure that you're really checking those licenses super carefully to make sure that you've actually got the rights to make them and then to continue distributing them, because you don't want the license to end and then got to try and unravel all of those NFTs, because that'd be really tricky. Okay, on to consumer and child protection. So this, I think, is going to be one of the areas that businesses in this space have challenges with the most, to be honest. And there's a ton of law that we can't really get into here. But a really broad tenet of consumer protection is that you've got to be clear with consumers upfront about what they're buying, what they're paying for, what rights they get. And I think that's going to be quite challenging for these really complex crypto projects, particularly where a lot of the rules for that project might not even be known at the time of, say, issuing a token and getting users to buy in. That might be particularly true with DAOs when it comes to like operating game decisions, what things are going to be voted on, what the voting mechanics are, will the rules around voting change? So being able to provide consumers with all that information up front is going to be really challenging because you might not always know it. And then there's also quite an interesting question which hasn't really been tested yet around refund rights, because in Europe you're kind of entitled to a refund of digital goods within a certain amount of time. And that's not really been tested yet in relation to NFTs. How would that even work? Would it be possible? How do you reverse transactions on the blockchain? Then you've got terms of service. So clearly, like I said before, you need a terms of service for your game. And a lot of businesses in this space are taking quite a hard line to their terms of service. A lot of the times they're really dense, they're really heavy, they disclaim all of their liability, they're 30 pages long, and they're just linked to somewhere else. Which is definitely one way to do things. But if you want to make sure that you've got enforceable terms of service, then there are certain restrictions and limitations around how you can limit your liability, what things you need to signpost to users. So it's not just a case of having a terms of service that gets you high and dry or clear of all the issues, I mean, but having one that's enforceable is another separate question. It can be quite challenging in a B2C context. Then you've got advertising that you need to pay careful attention to. So in the UK, there's the Advertising Standards Authority, and they've really taken quite a hard line against a lot of crypto advertisements, particularly in relation to fan tokens in the football space, for failing to essentially disclose the financial risk associated with participating in them. So being careful of advertising rules. And then child protection, it's a whole topic in its own right. We don't have time to go into, but there's this one thing called the Children's Code in particular. It's a new piece of guidance from the Data Protection Authority. And this is something which might require businesses to essentially assess the dangers or the risks that their products pose to children, which is anyone under 18. And it can encompass financial risks posed by NFTs, and then figuring out how to mitigate those risks, or maybe assess the age of their users, maybe block certain users, or maybe disable functionality for certain categories of users. And then last year, this is basically a slide for a whole bunch of really important things, but ones that I just don't have time to talk about here today. So security, there's going to be wallet security, exchange security, and you get smart contract vulnerabilities. There are going to be issues there. And there are definitely going to be questions about liability allocation and who's responsible for what's gone wrong. You've got platform regulation. So Steam, Valve has already come out and said you're not going to get blockchain games on Steam. Epic has said you might get it on Epic Games Store. I think the position is a little bit less clear around Apple, given their kind of rules around in-app purchases and how that would work with NFTs purchased, maybe outside of the ecosystem. You've got gambling. I think just with any games business, you really need to be taking a look at specific game mechanics as well as your game as a whole to make sure that you're not falling afoul of any gambling issues there. I think that's potentially a big issue for projects featuring breeding mechanics or chance-based mechanics. You've got data protection. Data protection is a big fun issue to do with blockchain in general, but I think it's going to pose some interesting questions for games businesses. Just as an example, how is your customer support team going to be dealing with issues posed by consumers? Say they've lost their NFTs. It's going to be quite hard to track a lot of that stuff because, yes, you can track transactions on the blockchain, but there is anonymity kind of baked into the whole idea of the blockchain. So how do you track and trace all that stuff, or is it just really difficult? And then tax. And I put this on here both for considerations for the people issuing NFTs and crypto assets, but also for the players, because arguably they are transacting in capital goods and maybe generating capital gains issues there. So whose responsibility is it to kind of think and flag those? So wrapping it up, I think I'm at time. There's no one type of NFT. So I think when we're talking about the risks here, it's really worth bearing that in mind. There's no one size fit all approach for all NFT strategies. I think there's potential opportunities for NFTs in games, but they're, like I've just shown, potentially significant challenges, whether that's commercial, technical, ethical, legal. This is a new space. People are doing new things with the technology. So there's novel and new questions all the time. So there's not always a preset answer for a lot of those things, and it's navigating shades of gray. Crypto regulation is evolving really quickly, and games are not at the forefront of those advancements at all. So the industry is going to get basically dragged along for a lot of new regulations and rules that are being created for the financial sector primarily, but which might apply to games in certain circumstances. And kind of wrapping all this together, anyone thinking about putting NFTs in games, you really need to look at your own strategy, your own implementations, what you're proposing users have rights to do, and do a fact-specific analysis of your own strategy. Because, like I say, you can't just really look at what everyone else is doing and say, if that's okay, then it's probably okay for me too. And that's it. That's 15 minutes. I could probably talk for another couple of hours about this, but I think I'm at time. So I don't know if I have any time for questions. If not, then fire me a message, or you've got my contact details on the slide here. Thanks for listening.
Peter, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. If you just leave that on the screen for a second and stop sharing screen, and we can get you in full screen. A couple of questions for you, if that's okay.
Stop sharing.
So there was, we are going to, questions come through. Are we going to share the slides afterwards? Yes, and the video. So you will get access to that afterwards. A question from AA about the children's code. Would it be possible that you could put some sort of link in the chat about that, Peter? If there's any sort of guidance on that, that would be quite useful.
Absolutely. I've also written a gi.biz piece about it, which I can send a link to.
Wonderful. If you can do that, that would be perfect. Thank you very much. Someone's got a question here about, this looks a bit like a legal question about the length of time for NFT. So it sounds like quite a specific example, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. If someone wants to mint a 3D asset as an NFT that confers a license of 10 years on a digital real estate, but it expires in 10 years, can they then license it to someone else after that 10-year period? So I guess the question is, can you set a specified time period for an NFT and then relicense it afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, when you're giving a license, you can really set the, if we're excluding blockchain from it for a moment, you can really set the license terms to be whatever you want. Whenever you're giving a license over IP, you can set the time, duration, the rev share, any aspect that you want of it. And duration is definitely one of those. So I don't see why you couldn't put in the terms and conditions of your NFT. Hey, you're only getting a license for 10 years. After that, it reverts to me. How that works technically on the blockchain and what actually happens to that NFT afterwards. I guess there's a question there, which I'm not sure of the answer to. Maybe the kind of, it just stops giving access to the in-game functionality after that 10-year time, and there's some smart thing that the game can track that. Essentially, the NFT just dies after 10 years. But yeah, you could definitely, whenever you're doing an asset, put something like a time restriction on it.
You also mentioned, thank you for that. You also mentioned about, and I hadn't really thought of this. So thanks for getting me thinking as well, which is always a good thing to do at this time of day. I view this as being, this is a game thing, this is a games industry thing. But as you're quite right, the driver behind this may well be other sectors such as financial institutions. So, is there any legislation that you're hearing rumblings around for financial institutions that's therefore going to have an impact on how we adopt this kind of technology? Is there anything coming through that
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, again, financial regulation isn't my personal area of specialism, but I know this is changing literally in the coming weeks. And I put on the slide there like 5 different buckets of areas of regulation. That is literally like the headline summary of like some giant swathes of other legislation and rules that fall within each of those buckets. So are things kind of changing and are things in the pipeline? Yes, absolutely. In the coming weeks and months and over the course of the year, I think the FCA is probably going to change its position on things, and things are going to be brought within regulation that previously might not have been caught within it. So not aware of literal specific pieces of legislation to be aware of, but a lot of this stuff is just generally moving, and kind of new guidance is being put out all the time.
Wonderful. No surprise there, I guess. So thank you for taking that one on. There's a question in the chat from WL. If you can just type a little answer in there, that would be greatly appreciated. But thanks to our audience. Well, thank you, Peter. I'll let you go away now. Thank you very much for that. And I welcome Tom and James from Helicon NFT. So if you turn your cameras and sound on and then say hello, you'll be
hello everyone, how are we doing?
Hello. Yeah, wonderful.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Lots of questions there from the audience, so keep them coming in the Q&A section. Greatly appreciate that. James and Tom, I don't know who's speaking first, so I'm going to let you decide, and I'll turn my camera off. Over to you two. Thank you.
Well, no worries. Yeah, I think James, you could probably start off with the introduction, if that's all right.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Peter, for that. I mean, obviously we built a platform, and obviously we're taking advice. And one of the things that fascinated me there was the regulations differ per country, and that's a very good point. Actually, I thought that was a very, very informative and very interesting from the legal standpoint. So it's given us food for thought on some of the things that we need to be thinking about, because obviously one of our key aspects of our business with launching a play to earn gaming ecosystem is that we want to be audited, we want to be scrutinized, we want to be doing things properly. and that will differ from country to country. So first of all, anyway, thank you, Peter, and to introduce ourselves. I won't go on for too long. I know we've got a limited time here, but thank you, Sam, and thank you, Uki, for the opportunity to discuss this with you today. Tom and I have been working in the gaming events business for a few years now. We've worked on various licenses. We launched gaming festivals in Dubai and in Saudi Arabia. We started learning about the blockchain space and understanding the play to earn, largely due to the fact that we thought and this will be terribly unpopular with some of the games, so I apologize in advance, but we felt there needed to be a little bit more fairness in terms of sharing and the ability for the gamer to be able to transfer in-game assets and have some ownership, etc. So Peter's certainly raised a few very, very interesting points there, and I'll let Tom explain a little bit more about who we are and what we're doing, and maybe do you want to share this? Do you want me to share the screen, Tom, so you can?
Yeah, feel free to share the slide. What I'm going to do is I'll just give you guys a quick overview of who we are as Helicon NFT, what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and then the slide will be a little bit more, catered towards the developers and such within gaming as well. So. Yeah, I'll just get into that if that's all right. So Helicon NFT is all about putting the power back into the hands of the gamers, as James rightly said. I've been a gamer my whole life, and when the shift towards microtransaction happened, I thought it was interesting. But it was a great way for developers to make a lot more money, and a great way for gamers to play games that have been reinvested into it. It's fascinating. But now blockchain's come along, and we've got play to earn gaming, and we believe that it's only fair that the gamers are able to extract what they put into a game and back out of it again.
That's sorry, I do apologize. Is that the right?
No, actually, sorry, that's not. You're looking for Helicon NFT Deck 2022.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Apologies.
That's okay. We'll get there. So we are the first all-encompassing ecosystem of its kind. Gamers will be able to monetize their in-game assets to buy and sell these NFTs through our marketplace, which we call the Helicon Marketplace. And that'll be using our governance token, which is called the Helicon Drachma token, HDT for short. And that sort of threads everything together for us within our ecosystem. We are aggregating existing games to be blockchain and NFT enabled for a true intergaming experience within the metaverse as well. So that's where we differ from some of the, by no means are we the first to make a blockchain game. We're not a first marketplace for NFTs either, but we are the first to aggregate it all under one umbrella. So even without playing games, where it really differs from anyone else doing blockchain games is that we're not only offering gamers the chance to control their assets and earn and trade on a marketplace, but even if you don't play games, you can still benefit from our fundamental system that we've built, that we've called Agora. And that consists of our marketplace, our yield aggregators, the decentralized governance, and what we call our Helicon add-on system, which is our developers working with game developers in order to turn it into a blockchain and NFT enabled game. And so within our marketplace, we've created a unique feature called Master NFTs. It's a way for people to earn from liquidity mining and regular NFT trading. And essentially that's a smart contract, which is held for a maximum of 24 hours. And that enables the holder to earn 5% of all mining rewards. So we've got 9 liquidity mining pools. So those who don't want to play games, or those who want some passive earning opportunities, that's all under the same Helicon NFT umbrella as well. I should say regular NFTs are the in-game assets that can be traded or exchanged on our marketplace. And those will be categorized automatically to one of 9 master NFT pools. And then that's created through our game interface. Now, where that is interesting when it comes to developers is this is where the royalties get set by the creators of these NFTs. So to earn from future transactions, which adds a new layer of revenue to what you guys have with your games and what the developers are building with the economy of their games. That new layer of revenue is not taking anything away from what your game already has. It's actually a new economy that we can implement and work with your teams to implement into the game. The fantastic thing that we found so far is that gamers are very receptive to blockchain gaming because the mechanics aren't all that different. I mean, you take Fortnite, for example, you still have to spend fiat real world money to buy V-Bucks in order to spend those in the game. With blockchain gaming, that's not too different, except for the fact that the V-Bucks would have real world value outside of the game, and the skin that you're buying, you can then sell to someone else. for example. And then, going into the sort of community element is we want to run some esports tournaments, and through developers, we can create a one-of-one NFT that, through winning the tournament, only one person gets to win that. And now suddenly that NFT is unique and, would have a higher price on the secondary market because of it. So what we've designed is a Helicon add-on system. And I think personally that adds the most exciting part for the developers and their players as well. So still the wrong slide deck there, James. We'll find it in a minute. I'll put it on in a minute, if not, once I've gone through my spiel. But so once the games have connected to us through our game interface gateway, we'll work with the developers of those games to add normal game functions to these new NFT assets. So that allows players to upgrade them, or for example, depending on your game mechanics, you could enchant a weapon to make it more powerful, for example, because as we know, non-fungible means it can't be changed. So if we're implementing NFTs into a game, we have to have some kind of functions that allows them to be slightly fungible in a way, depending on what your game mechanics are. And every game is different. Every game is going to be different. Every conversation is going to be unique because each game economy is going to be separate. A lot of the gamers that we're talking to and the developers we're speaking to at the moment, they're sort of at the stage of, for example, they're about 70% of the way through launching a game. However, during that time, blockchain and play-to-earn gaming came along, and now they want to revamp the economy within the game, and that's where our team comes in. So we want, but as Helicon, we want the lines between what we call blockchain games and traditional games to become increasingly blurry. We want the user experience to become seamless. Right now, there's a lot of barriers to entry. I think that's one of the first hurdles that we're going to have to overcome. You don't want a $500 price point just to start playing a game. You don't want to have your users set up 5 different wallets and 3 different exchanges in order to play your game as well. So we want it to get to the point where someone's playing a game in the future and they may not even know that it's a blockchain game. So we want to make that as seamless as possible by bridging the gap between these centralized games and decentralized NFTs, and sort of striking a balance between providing an enjoyable gaming experience and incentivizing participation from the gamers as well. So that's sort of what we're doing in a nutshell. And where we're up to at the moment is, we'll show you in the deck, is that we're on a roadmap. We have a whitelist for our own NFT project launching, but more than anything else, we're just aggressively speaking to any and all game developers at the moment, in order for us to learn as well, because the more questions we get asked, the more games that we discuss, the more in-game mechanics that we need to talk about, the more things we can implement as well. So we're going around associations, we're speaking to studios individually about their games. We've already onboarded some partners that we'll show you as well. So we're quite far down the line. We've got a great community at the moment, and they're all expecting, our launch and our new games now. We are building our own game in the background, I should say, although that's obviously going to be further down the pipeline as well. So let me see if I can pull up this deck at the moment to go through it real quick for you guys, seeing as James can't find it.
Apologies for that, guys. I have no idea why it's not sharing, but you've got it.
Sorry, guys. Can you see this okay? I'm not sure what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. All good.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, we're going to go through, obviously, what I said earlier is this, who we are. We're tokenizing centralized games. We're a DeFi, NFT, and blockchain gaming ecosystem. We've built on the Binance Smart Chain. I think that's quite important to bring up now. We spent a long time researching what chain we should build on, and what reasons for those. And, there's a lot of options these days, which is a fantastic thing for the industry. We explored a lot of layer 2 solutions, some fantastic ones there, and came very close to building on Arbitrum 1 or Immutable X. Again, fantastic layer 2 solutions run by extremely smart people. However, it comes back down to the barrier of entry again. In doing these layer 2 solutions, there's still a long process of having to get a token from somewhere, exchange it somewhere else, add it to a liquidity pool, and then you get an item that you're able to use in the game. And we wanted to make sure that we started off on the right foot in making sure that the seamlessness was happening from day one. We chose Binance Smart Chain because of their advancements in smart contracts. And basically their plans for the future as well. We think it's fantastic what they're doing with it. And what that means is that the end user experience is going to vastly improve. They're not going to have to spend so much just to start playing a game. So therefore, you're not cutting out a sort of chunk of your audience who may not be as affluent. There's a lot that goes into these kind of things as well. So this is a sort of overview of our roadmap at the moment. Obviously, we're here, at the moment. And yeah, so integration with our GPs means our game partners, our front end user interface is being completed as well at the moment. And right now, as I said earlier, we are building an NFT project, an NFT launch, in that people would be receiving in-game items as the NFTs. And then later on down the line, they'll be able to port those into the game, upgrade them, obviously sell them on the secondary market. And this is basically how we're building a community now without having the product available to everyone immediately. And that's that we find this stuff really interesting. Another great point that Peter made earlier, and obviously something that we all need to consider in this industry, is where the big boys stand on this new industry. So we know where Steam stands, we know where Epic stands. And in a way, I think that's actually a really good thing. Steam making the announcement that they made shows a lot of gamers their intentions for the future and their IPs. And then you get, on the flip side of that, in the blockchain world, people are building these decentralized autonomous organizations whereby anybody who, for example, if you launched a game with us and you launched a token with us, anybody who holds an NFT or one of your tokens is now a stakeholder in your company. They should have a say in what happens with that. And that's where the decentralized autonomous organizations come into play. We can have voting systems. It comes down to the NFTs, which gives you access to VIP or voting, the utilities that Peter had also mentioned. There's really interesting and new innovative ways of engaging your community. But what we find based off the back of where Steam stands is that it would only succeed if you're open to everyone, if gamers have a say, if they have operational control of their own assets, if they get to have a say in what happens within a game itself or within our ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, once we release Helicon NFT out there, we don't operate it anymore. It's the decentralized autonomous organization that's going to be making these recommendations to us in order to implement for improvement going forward. Another big thing that we're focusing on at the moment is auditing. Now, I'm involved in, or I should say, I've been keeping an eye on a lot of NFT projects recently. A lot of them start off as the NFT project, and then further down the line, it's leading towards a game, which is fine. It's absolutely fantastic. As I said earlier, I think it's a really interesting way to fundraise for these projects. However, Peter will say that opens you up to a lot of legal issues, I'm sure. So when it comes down to auditing, people will, and they do expect you to be completely open and upfront about where the money's going, what you're using it for, even things to be how effective is your decentralized autonomous organization. Users buy into that, and it's really important for us to be open and transparent about these kind of things. And that actually leads me on to our roadmap highlights, carbon offsetting as well. This is another major thing that I shouldn't describe it as a thing. It's a major world problem that is being addressed heavily at the moment. And of course, it's a big topic when it comes into crypto and blockchain. We absolutely are conscious of our energy consumption. There are multiple ways that we can offset that through buying carbon tokens, for example. We're speaking with some fantastic partners at the moment, even someone who's building a play-to-earn game that has a real-world plan in order to, plant new trees and such through the utilization of the game. And these are fantastic initiatives. So we will be partnering with those people. We are extremely conscious of our carbon footprint as well. And we are absolutely conscious of what our audience wants in the sense that if they don't have a voice, we don't see the sustainability behind it. So we've heard your pain point, the developers. They've got notorious pain points. Discoverability, marketing is always going to be difficult. We as Helicon NFT, obviously, we allowed you to tokenize your games. We would work with you on the marketing. And I'd love to link you up. Unfortunately, our marketing manager, Claire, is not here today, put this fantastic slide together, but she'll talk to you guys all day about the marketing of how to promote these games. And I think that is almost more important at this stage to talk about how you're going to promote the game than to give everyone the technical details of how the economy of the game is going to work. People are buying into the idea at the sort of early stages as well. So that's sort of where we come in. And that's how we partner with you guys. We're increasing your game discoverability. We're blockchain enabling your game, gaining new players, adding new layers of revenue to it. It's early days at the moment. This is what's really interesting about this is, at the moment, there's got to be probably just over 1,000 blockchain games, a lot more in development, I'm sure, at the moment. compare that to what we know, as traditional games, there's over 1 million these days. So it's extremely early days, and that's why we find this so exciting. We think this now is the right time to get this up and running as well. So again, we're open to speaking to any developers at the moment. It's super easy, 100% free at the moment. All we ask of you guys is to have a conversation with us and just to talk to us about your game vision, because at the end of the day, we are not a game studio. We don't build storylines for the games. That the innovative storylines and the amazing games that have come out is something that we want to celebrate and enhance going forward. So we don't want to take anything away from that. We're going to let you guys do what you do best. But that's where we come in with the blockchain expertise and the marketing expertise as well, plus the overall ecosystem of which ultimately we want it to be a one-stop shop for developers, for the gamers, for ourselves, for people who are interested in making some passive income from our token as well. We just want to be a one-stop shop, everything gaming, along with onboarding a lot of game partners as well as we go through it. So the onboarding phase is fairly simple. Once we get to that stage, it would only be a sort of 4-step process. We're agreeing on a partnership. We'll talk about the promotion, and this is the biggest part for us, is how we're going to market it, how we're going to promote you guys. We have a lot of James will be able to explain this a little bit better than I can, but it's a lot more than just what we're doing with the Helicon NFT. We also have the media company behind it as well. We're creating a studio. We have multiple events. We just launched a blockchain event in Abu Dhabi in December quite successfully, and some fantastic contacts. And I'm now based here in New York. So we're going to be rolling out our services out here in terms of our promotion, in terms of speaking to all of the developers, and just trying to get some round tables going with developers so we can hear from you exactly what you would expect or what your concerns might be, because that only helps us, and then we can give Peter a call and figure out what we need to do legally as well afterwards. I'm joking, be facetious, of course, but just some of our current partners at the moment. We've got some amazing partners. This IndaHash campaign is really exciting. They work with over 1 million influencers and celebrities, a very impressive pipeline of their celebrities at the moment. And what they do is they for example, if you like the FaZe clan and you have a skin in your Fortnite game, these guys are able to create an NFT with that skin with like a signature of your favorite celebrity on it. So ultimately we could be partnering up with some of the biggest esports, 100 Thieves in some of the biggest esports teams in the world, and they could be giving unique NFTs away as prizes for their tournaments, and they'll be signed. And it's a new way to interact with your users. It's a new way for the users to show off some things within the game as well. It's like, yeah, you might have that skin, but do you have that skin signed by this celebrity kind of thing? It's just it's really fantastic. And then just lastly, feeding into the current game partners, we've got Bad Fox Studios from the UK, Infinite 8 creating some amazing games at the moment, Gen Meta as well with some fantastic plans, Land Rocker, Super Squad, all these things, all these guys are fantastic in building games, and all of them are interested in blockchain and the potential in the future. So not only are we working with these games, but these guys are helping us refine what we're doing as well. And that's only going to continue once we sign on more and more partners. So I would say, unless James has any better sign off from that, I would say our goal is at the moment to just speak to any and all developers. We want to hear where you're at with your games, what your plans are, and what your questions might be about blockchain, because then at that point we can start evaluating it on a case-by-case basis. Yes, the economy of this model would work perfectly for you, or perhaps you've even got a game that is blockchain and you're looking to help with the marketing, help with the promotion. We are a very global company at the moment. As I said, I'm here in New York. James and some of the team are in Dubai. We have offices in London as well, and in China and Australia. So we're not beholden to one area, and that's actually why the point that Peter raised earlier about sort of terms and conditions and legalities across in different markets is a fascinating one for us. But yeah, I mean, that's who we are. That's what we're doing, and that's where we're up to. So I really want to thank Yuki and Sam for your time here today. Open to any and all questions. Like I said, we're happy to send you this. We'll send you our overall deck, our website as well. But we're very active on Discord in terms of answering questions. I host regular AMA sessions as well. And we'd love to do this again and again, just to get as much information as possible from where the market's at the moment.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom, for that presentation. As you say, we will share the slides afterwards. We are a little bit behind schedule. Just going to pop one question, if that's okay. And then
that's all right. I waffled on, did I?
Well, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all good, informative stuff. Yeah. And that's what people are here for. So that's good. There's a couple of things in the Q&A you can have a look at afterwards. question from NP and a question from AA would be helpful. Glenn's questions we're going to cover in the panel later, actually. But I mean, you're already working with studios. What's the when you talk to studios and you've got 4 or 5 signed up there already, what are the key things that you're doing that really attracts those studios to your platform?
That's a great question. I would say marketing, but I'll let James elaborate.
Yeah, I think essentially, as Tom said, most of it is about collaboration. Most of it's about working with them to find out what the key areas, the support that they're looking for. So it could be strategic partners, it could be marketing, advertising, publicity, PR, social media. We reached 70 million people with our gaming festivals a couple of years ago. So we've got access to a lot of new audiences, which I think makes us a little bit unique in the fact that we can open up to markets that perhaps some of the developers wouldn't have had access to. So the visibility is a huge thing. I think one of the key points we're finding with most of them, throughout the Middle East and Africa, where I'm based at the moment, obviously there's a massive audience that very often the publishers neglect themselves, to be honest. But if you think of an audience of 500 million people, and then obviously that suddenly expands into 2 billion people if you take Africa and India, you're already going into sort of a third of the world's population, which is huge. Marketing and reaching those people is extremely difficult, and I think we open up to new audiences is one of the big parts of marketing, as Tom said. We also have a studio where we actually produce content, and we're producing some shows and video content. So essentially things that they may spend a lot of money on. Normally in marketing, we're cutting that out for them and offering that inclusive as part of the service for no charge. So I think that's a huge unique selling point, basically.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much, and certainly some food for thought there for studios. So we'll share your details.
I'm happy to answer these questions afterwards. Don't worry, I'll type them out.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for doing that, Tom, and thank you, James.
Thank you.
Moving on, going to invite David Amor to join us from Playmint. So if James and Tom, you can turn those cameras off and sound off, and
no problem.
David,
thanks,
hello. Yeah, thank you.
Hey,
David, how
Sam.
are you? You all right? Lovely
I'm
to see you.
Likewise, nice to see you.
You're always perfect, though, aren't you? Let's be honest.
I'm nervous. I can't share my screen. Sometimes happens, doesn't it?
Well, is there anything behind you, by the way, we shouldn't be looking at?
No,
is there anything on that whiteboard?
Well, blockchain is all about developing in the open. I did consider that, and I figured it would be. It's fine, I think. All right, I'm checking. You can see that.
I can see your slides perfectly. Yeah. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, David.
Good. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I thought. Didn't know quite how to pitch this, what level to pitch this at, or indeed haven't timed it particularly, but I think we'll probably be okay. I make games, so it'll be more talking about the game side and what I've learned. So these things really, a little bit about us, the company, and then a couple of thoughts that I had, and then a little bit about the game that we've recently released at the end. Okay. Okay. So this is me, 10 years. Publishers, mostly EA, 10 years running console companies, mostly a company called Relentless, 10 years running mobile free-to-play companies, mostly Mag Interactive, and then in the last 6 months been running a blockchain game company called Playmint. We're all game natives, 6 months old, 20 of us currently, and growing fairly quickly, venture-backed, so we're off to the races. All right, I'm having problems stepping through this. Okay, so I think in a way Tom covered a little bit about this already. A simple way of thinking about what Web3 is, and I would say that blockchain is part of Web3. Web 1, the first version of the internet, was pretty much a read-only version of the internet where people would go to look things up. Web 2 was where people started to contribute, so things like Facebook and Twitter. And really a lot of the internet started to be built from the participants of the internet contributing to it, building something bigger. Web 3 is a new idea, sort of read, write, but also own. And by that you could say, in a sense, who is it that owns your Instagram pictures that you upload? Who is it that owns the tweets that you put out there. In a sense, you feel like you own them. Indeed, the game items that you have, who really owns those? Certainly the person making money out of your tweets or your Instagram pictures is not you. So in a sense, even if you own them, then you're not really making any money out of them. And maybe that's fine, maybe it's not. But I think that's certainly something that's being tested with this idea of Web3. What about if the people actually own the things, their digital items, rather than essentially giving them to other companies? So that's really sort of how I see Web3 and blockchain, and is a technology that powers that, I suppose, and blockchain games are a part of Web3, a relatively small part. As I say, I'm struggling to... Okay, so yeah, first of all, my YouTube analogy, bear with me. So I won't pretend I'm a YouTube historian, but I'm really speaking from the context of somebody that consumes it, really. About early on, like a couple of years into YouTube's history, they made a change that said, we will, if you make great content that people love, then we're happy to share the ad revenue with you. What is that, 50-50 maybe? And it sounded like quite a small change, but it had a massive effect. And I tried to find a graph that illustrated it. I don't know if it really does. I think it was introduced at 2007, and it's always gone up loads anyway. So I'm not sure if it's a great graph to show. But the point is, I think that when YouTube said, you stand to make some money if you create a popular video, then I think it had a dramatic effect on the content of videos being uploaded to YouTube, some good, some bad, but everybody was trying to create content that, well, not everybody, but certainly a large proportion of content creators were now motivated to try and create content that a lot of people enjoyed watching. And of course, YouTube ended up being an enormous platform for watching videos. You don't need me to tell you that. But I guess my point is that change, the idea of sharing the revenue with the content creators, have a massive effect. I think it's probably something like this, that if you think about all the people that are motivated by financial incentives on YouTube, those content creators, some are millionaire YouTuber. This in no way is representative. It's not a real chart. Some are millionaire YouTubers. Some make a living from YouTubers. A larger amount make pocket money. And the vast majority, I'm sure, are just wannabe YouTubers that make no money at all. But I think that the result is that for me as a consumer, and the vast majority of people using YouTube are the consumers, then it makes for good content. All those people trying to make great videos for me to watch. And I think that, and the reason I mention that analogy is that I think that's similar to what I think that we'll see happen when we motivate players by saying, if you do cool stuff in our game, and we'll decide what's cool, by the way, if you do behavior that we like, if you're doing things that people like watching or interacting with or running leagues or whatever it is, helping out in the community, then we will incentivize you in a financial way. And I think it's hard to predict exactly what the end state of that's going to be, but I think it's going to be similar in size to what happened when YouTube said, we'll incentivize your content creators. So it's not it's not science by any means, but it's a thought that I had along the way of building blockchain games. So I think we're going to see something similar to that. That's my YouTube analogy. The second thing is about DNA structures, so to say. And I was thinking back to 2000, and then a story from 2013 that occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. And I was running a company called Relentless at the time, which made PlayStation games for Sony. This game came along called 4 Picks 1 Word. This is a sort of early App Store game for iPhone. And I remember being in the pub and someone said, have you seen this quiz game? And they've had 20 million downloads already. And I looked at it, and as you're looking at it now, I go, well, there's nothing to that. That's very straightforward. And they've had 20 million downloads. And at the time, I was making this game called Buzz, which is a popular PlayStation quiz game. And it had fancy graphics, fancy animation, head-to-head multiplayer, user-generated content, Jason Donovan doing the voice, everything that we could throw at making the best possible quiz game. And I remember thinking, well, if that silly 4 Picks 1 Word game has got 20 million downloads, wait until people find out about a Buzz game. It's way, way better, objectively. And I know it sounds ridiculous now, but, that's really what I thought, that just wait until they find our game, they're going to love it. And of course, what turned out to be the case is that what proved important in creating a popular mobile game is very different from what a popular console game was. And I think, if I think back, I'm not going to go through all these, but so much of what was popular in mobile free-to-play, the way that it was marketed, the game mechanics, the way you analyze it, the segmentation, all of these things were very, very different from the console games that I was making at that time, and spent 2 years trying to persuade a disinterested mobile audience that they should be playing a different kind of game before realizing, no, they're happy with the games that they're playing right now. They need to be different. And again, my point there is that I think the shared DNA between traditional games and blockchain games is probably pretty small. So I don't know this, of course, but I think that it's certainly an assumption to think that just sort of taking the games that we know already and sprinkling some NFTs on top is going to work. It's where I started about a year ago, thinking, great, well, 2.5 billion people play mobile games. Wait until we sort of apply the Top Shot, NBA Top Shot mechanics to mobile games. It's going to work perfectly. They want the perfect market to target. But in thinking it through and what we've done since, I think it's going to be a different kind of game that really resonates with a kind of player that's interested in blockchain games. Just a prediction, may or may not be correct, but that's I thought something to think about anyway. So the third thing I want to do is to talk about a game that we launched, not for promotional purposes, just because I think sometimes people talk so much about the technology and the infrastructure and what Web3 is and all that kind of stuff that I think what the game is sometimes get missed or misunderstood, or a lot of the times there isn't even a game. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to, rather than try and hit the target from 2 years away, trying to create a popular blockchain game by trying to predict what that was going to be in 2 years' time. Instead, we decided to do something smaller, actually getting it out there, figure out what to do, try some things we hadn't done before, and that's how we ended up releasing the Crypt. So I'm going to explain a little bit about what that is, and maybe if there's time, talk about how that went. So we released this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I have to start here. Now, if you know what loot is, then it's easy. It's a complicated thing to get your head around, or at least take some mental gymnastics. This is my loot bag. This is the one I own. Nobody else owns it in the world. This is mine. And as you can see, it's a black box with white text on. And there's 8,000 of these that were offered up for free last August. And at first it was a bit of curiosity. What's the point in this? What do you do with it? What is it? It doesn't look good. And that's the person that released it made the point that, no, he hopes that people will build it into games, which is a really bizarre idea, sort of releasing something for a game, but with no plans in ever releasing a game. And to start with that game element, it's really weird. And I remember at the time when it first came out, sort of ridiculing the idea that would ever work. And then the more you think about it, you go, well, maybe if you could start with the game and then build games around an NFT. And so when we just thinking about what to do as our first blockchain game, then we decided actually this weird world of what's now known as the Lootverse is a really interesting place to start. It would have been a lot easier, in a sense, for us to build games like we built 100 times before, but it wouldn't really teach us the new stuff about blockchain and Web3. So we deliberately threw ourselves into the deep end. And let me see what else to say about that. So yeah, those were issued, 8,000 of them last year. So we've got, I suppose another thing is that since these are now in the hands of people that have decided they love this idea, then we've got an addressable audience. And I think it's tough. It's always tough in games to find your audience and how you get them to know about the game, how you market it. One of the things by sort of hooking ourselves onto an existing NFT set was that we had an audience that we could talk to. There's a weekly town square meeting for loot. There's a Discord, as you might imagine. There's various Twitter feeds that we can talk at. So that's where we started, and it's gone super well. Really pleased with it. So this is the game. or at least the game by way of a few slides. It's called The Crypt. And so this is actual screenshot. So it's a web interface, 2D web interface. This is what you see when you first go to the site, thecrypt.game. And you can see that this is chapter 1 of several chapters. So this is something simple that we released in like the first MVP of the game, I suppose you'd call it, chapter 1. And you can see that you can connect your MetaMask wallet in the top right there so that the game can see which NFTs you own. So if I click on Enter the Crypt, then here's a set of, well, you can see 8 dungeons, but there were 16 dungeons that were available to be raided with your loot NFT. And here you can see that some of them have already been defeated in this screenshot here. Some of them, this one here, I've already dealt some damage. I'll talk about that in a second. And then this one here is telling me that I could raid this dungeon for 5 damage. So let's just go into that one for a second. Okay, yeah. So this is the Dungeon of Perfection. You can see that I've loaded up a loot bag here on the right. Now, the only loot bags that I own, well, this is a demo version, but only loot bags that I own will show up here as a player. And I can see that my loot bag is on the right and the Dungeon of Perfection here is on the left. Items here written by Sir Ian Livingstone, just to bring it back to the regular games industry for a second. And you can see that there's a number of attributes, and it's really, the game mechanic is really like top trumps. So you can see here, if my arrows work, that one of the items here is a platinum ring that was in my loot bag that I already own. And over here, I can see, oops, on the left-hand side, you can see that it's going to take 2 hit points from the demon spawn in the Dungeon of Perfection. And you can see that there's 42 hit points total and 35 still remain. And you can see that now I could raid that dungeon for 5 damage. Now, depending on which loot bag I used, would have greater or lesser chance of taking hit points from the dungeon. So there's some strategy now in picking the right dungeon. And it's not just a question of picking the dungeon where I inflict most damage. I've also got to figure out the best prizes are released to players first. So if I've been successful in helping defeat the first dungeon that falls, then I'll get a gold skull, which is rarer than later, well, we call them relics, but sort of prizes from winning the game. So a lot of the game actually happens outside of the game. So as you can see, super simple interface here, but there's a lot of the game, maybe even the majority of the game, happens in Discords where people are sort of trying to get raiding strategies with other players so that they can be successful in being part of the dungeon that gets defeated first. So if I raid for 5 damage, that's a sort of action on the Ethereum blockchain. And if I'm successful, the best prize that I could have got after it's all defeated is one of these skulls, which is actually an NFT. And as an NFT, then it shows up in OpenSea, and if you want to, you can sell that NFT and or buy it from other players. Now, a question that everybody asks is, well, why would I care about a gold skull of skill? I think the days of being able to just issue NFTs and say they're cool, aren't they? You know, I think that was maybe the beginning of last year. You can't really, in my opinion, you can't really build up a lot of value in NFTs if you don't describe what you can use it for, what the utility is. So what we're saying that you'll be able to use these for is in future versions of our game. So if you have a gold skull of skill, we haven't said exactly what it's going to be used for yet, but you can imagine that in a bigger 3D dungeon game that we're building, then that will give you some maybe access to a different dungeon, or maybe give you some super weapon, or give you some ability, maybe even get to own a dungeon that other people can raid and you can create an income that way or something like that. So the NFT is like something that the players can own now that gets used in subsequent versions of our game. So that's it. I mean, there's more to the game than that, but that's a sort of simple overview, deliberately trying to keep within time here. What else would I say? Yeah, runs on Ethereum blockchain. And just to say how that went, I mean, we didn't really know if it would work. I think we were doing some quite fancy things with our smart contracts, and it was the first time that we'd done it as a team, at least. And I also didn't know if people were going to show up. So we'll talk at these town hall meetings and hope that people are interested in what we do, but you never know for sure. But yeah, it all stood up, and it was way more popular than we thought, to the point that all those dungeons I just mentioned were defeated in 15 minutes. So I think there's a bit of game balancing for us in subsequent chapters of the Crypt, but nonetheless, a nice outcome for the first game that we made. I think that's pretty much it. My predictions are that I think, who knows really, but my feeling is that Web3 is going to be a much bigger thing than free to play. I mean, I think partly because Web3 is not just games. Free to play was mostly exclusively games, I guess. Web3 is a much bigger idea that will apply to more things. But also, I'd sort of hazard a guess that within 3 or 4 years, then blockchain games will probably be a $50 billion part of the industry, alongside free to play and console, etc. And probably, as has been the case in the past, probably additive rather than cannibalizing existing parts of the market. That's my feeling. As I said earlier, my sense is it might not share much DNA with games that we've seen before. If you think about, well, right now you can get all 3 Tomb Raider games for free on the Epic Game Store, and yet people are not playing those amazing games for free. Instead, they're paying money in much more lo-fi crypto blockchain games. So evidently there's something about those kind of games that's more interesting to players than AAA free games. And so that sort of maybe backs up my thesis a bit. Interoperability, this idea of taking other people's game items, as we did with the Loot NFT, and using them in ours, I think is going to be important. And I think that taking a weapon from Call of Duty and take it into Fortnite, I think isn't the way interoperability is going to work. I think it's going to be more about the kind of thing I described, where we take somebody else's NFT and say, you're very welcome to use it in our game. In our game, it does this, whatever this is. So you can see that we've already done that with the Loot, with our Crypt game. And in fact, there's about 12 games, 12 things you can do with your Loot NFT, some games, some other things. So you can see that that starting with the game primitive means that maybe is a different way of making that interoperability work. And my, you may have a different approach. My feeling is that smaller projects in the deep end is probably a better way to go, rather than, as I said, massive. And I see some teams, particularly crypto teams, I think, developing very well-funded teams, building very ambitious projects, hoping that they hit the target in 18 months, 2 years' time. That's not our production philosophy. I think it's more important to do smaller things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and then iterate. And I think that's probably a better way of figuring out this new embryonic part of the games industry. So I think that's pretty much it. Last thing I'd say is there's tons of information about Web3 and blockchain games, etc. But one thing that I listened to last year that I thought was really good was this episode of the Tim Ferriss show. Just people talking about Web3 in its entirety. And I think it makes a good, for me at least, interesting listening as to what the opportunity was in Web3. Anyway, there you go, plug for somebody else's podcast. That's me. Back to you, Sam, I think.
Thank you very much, David. Really interesting. A couple of questions for you. How does the Crypt make money? Someone's gone straight to the heart of it, haven't they?
Yeah, well, asking the big questions, important questions. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a roundabout. I'll give you an exact answer and a roundabout answer. So the Relic NFT, which is, if you like, the prize from winning, from beating a dungeon, is an NFT that we give away for free. So, it costs some money to mint it, but we don't charge for that. But we do take revenue on secondary sales. So if somebody sells one those Relic NFTs, the ones that have sold, which isn't many, they're selling for, maybe, I can't remember, $500 or $1,000. So in the hope that they will be used for useful things later, and we take a 5% share on that. Now, I don't think that's, we're venture funded and we don't need to make money in the short term. So I'd sooner do things that help us learn this new space rather than just be motivated by what can we do that creates revenue. So we have some idea, I think we went into that idea of 5% in the secondary market without any expectations of making much money, and that proved to be correct. It didn't really pay for the bar bill in the pub that night, but I think there's plenty of options for us to introduce a token. Or the other thing I would say is I don't want to show up to a community and be seen to be vampiric. Here comes the venture-backed games company, and they're out to try and suck up as much money as they can out of this cool thing we've created. So not a very useful answer maybe, but that's our approach.
No, it's an interesting view. I like the fact that you're talking about this being additive to the industry rather than replacing what's currently going on in the games industry. Well, that's a really positive approach,
hasn't it? When has that not been the case? So I think that whenever we went from PC games to console games to canvas games to mobile games, each time it's been additive. I don't ever remember web VR. I don't think it's really cannibalistic of the existing market. So to me, I think there are likely to be a lot of new players that are playing it for a different reason that maybe weren't playing games before. I mean, it's only a hypothesis. Don't know that yet, but as you say, nice to think that way, isn't it?
It is. And I'm going to direct you to a couple of questions in Q&A for you to have a look at, particularly interested in your view, if you can type an answer in that for SD's question about whether you think the audiences are money motivated through the trading opportunity, and does that mean that gameplay is potentially less important? So you're talking about the simplicity of games. It's really interesting that perhaps there are other things going on there. I'll leave you to answer those in the Q&A section, but I'd like to thank you very much for coming to join us today. Very informative, and we will share your slides and get some more people playing your games. That'll be the perfect solution, wouldn't it?
Well, they've all been beaten, but anyway.
Yeah, you need more dungeons. What are you doing? Having them all done in 15 minutes.
I better go and build more dungeons on that note. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers. Thanks, David.
Right, bye-bye.
And thank you for so many questions from the audience. Now we're going to move to our final section here, which is our panel. We are a little bit behind schedule, but that's how it goes sometimes. It's been very informative today. So as Dave stops sharing his screen and move on, it'll give us the chance to invite Dave Ranyard and Ed Mason to come and join me.
Hello.
Dave, I can see you there. You all right? All good?
Yes, I'm very good. Thank you.
Oh, where's Ed? Is Ed still here?
Hello. Good to see you all today.
See, when you talk, you then appear on my screen. That's how it works. This is beautiful.
Lovely.
Voice activated.
Voice activated, like everything in life, yeah?
Yes.
Delighted that you two can join me here. And Ed, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, just to set the scene for us, do you mind giving us a 90 seconds, 2 minutes on who you are, a little bit about your company, and kind of what you're working on of interest to this audience today?
Indeed. Thank you very much for that, Sam. So my name is Ed Mason. I've been working in emerging technologies now for coming up to a decade. I built the first self-contained virtual reality headset in about 2013. And my company partnered with NVIDIA, building a new category in XR technology, a new device, if you will, that will be coming to market later on this year. The idea of emerging technologies has been quite fascinating to me, especially when it comes to the notion of a metaverse. I've been fortunate enough to give talks about the future of the metaverse with people like Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus, and Ernie Klein, the author of Ready Player One, to discuss what this space could be as we move forwards. And NFTs really caught my interest when I noticed that we're seeing content creators flowing into an emerging technology space. The age-old adage of content is king is never more true, and especially now we're seeing with NFTs and with XR, this idea of a killer app being a metaverse, I think, is probably quite right. So I can talk a lot about what I've been up to, but I know we're limited on time. So in essence, I've been focusing on XR technologies and prototypes and products with companies like Samsung and Mattel and NVIDIA, and now focusing on building some incredible content with NFTs as the funding mechanism.
I thought you might be plugging your new device coming out later this year. Do you want to tell us what it is? Oh,
Right, so we call Curve right here. So this is effectively a desktop class ARM-based PC that can be used plugged into a TV as a normal games console, but you can disconnect it and use it. You need to stand up for this, place this on your hip, plug it into a virtual reality headset, such as an HTC Vive or a Valve Index, so that you have a body-worn, high-fidelity PC that has a price point of a mobile device, but the power of a desktop class PC.
that sounds too good to be true. There must be a catch, Ed. We're going to find out what the catch is later,
Wonderful
if there is
stuff.
one. Dave, can I ask you to step forward and do the same thing? Maybe a short, brief introduction of who you are, what you've been up to, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been making games for 20 something years now. I was at PlayStation for a long time. I used to run the London studio for them, set up Dream Reality Interactive, which I'm the CEO of about 5 years ago, I think it is, maybe something like that. And we've been making various immersive games, similar to Ed, actually very excited about technology. And I guess the reason that me and Ed are on this panel together is we have partnered in a new metaverse venture, different funding model to David's. Ed, what he didn't mention is he's already been involved in 2 NFT art sales. The first of which I believe is for charity, Rare Pizzas, and then the second one was frogland.io. And so Ed, in fact, I got a very random WhatsApp from Ed, because I've known him a long time, about 10 months ago probably. Hey Dave, I'm building a metaverse for frogs. Do you want to join in? It's like Sunday morning, and Ed's in Bermuda, by the way, and I'm like, has he been drinking? What's going on? Anyway, it sounded interesting, so I kind of came on for the ride, and then after the sale, which was in September, we partnered more formally, and so Dream Reality are the development partners of Frogland. And Ed's team do the NFT bits and the narrative and loads of cool creative stuff. We just work together building this NFT metaverse, not just for frogs actually, but for other art NFTs. And I love new technologies and new things that are happening, and it's been a very interesting journey so far, and there's still a long way to go.
I'm glad it's useful for other things as well beyond frogs. I mean, that was limiting your market. You've got this whole world in front of you. Particularly interesting. We talked, and Ed mentioned a second ago, and you've followed up with a little bit about the sort of the access to finance route, the importance of that. This is a crucial thing for small and medium-sized studios. Where's the money? How can I do that? So people have sometimes said that blockchain NFT is a productive route, a new way of accessing finance. Is it? What are your thoughts on that? Dave, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I mean, actually, to be fair, Ed's the expert on that, which I really like. This is, we're showing now a video. Is this live? It's probably not the live.
This is live. I will apologise if there's a hammered frame rate. That is Zoom rather than the game. I can assure you it's running a blistering frame rate right now.
But it is an interesting route to finance. I mean, there's similarities to Kickstarter in that you kind of say, hey, we're doing this thing. Do you want to join in? But also some differences, I think, to Kickstarter because of NFT ownership, community, potentially governance tokens. It means that you really are building a game in harmony with the community. So sometimes people have said to me, it's a bit like moving a Discord group to 3D, which is actually quite an interesting way of looking at it. So you really do build your community first. Get some people excited and they come along for the journey. It's great because you can test things and say, hey, we're thinking of making these. Would you like these? But it's also different from a production perspective. So as like David was talking about more traditional game development where, you build out your roadmap and we've got ways of working agile. So we're not quite as waterfall as we used to be, but still, and the game does change over time, but still probably 70% of what you started with is in the end product. Whereas it's quite different with this. I think we have to be much more nimble and react to what the community are really excited about. We might put in a fairly trivial thing. You could literally leave something on the table and suddenly that becomes the coolest thing that everybody wants to do. And so you then have to rip up your schedule and start again because everybody wants to play dice or whatever. Is that a fair assessment, Ed?
That is a wonderful assessment, Dave. So in essence, the idea between the traditional method of fundraising for video games, or for any fundraising in that matter, is putting together a pitch deck, if you will, a presentation, pitching it to some board executives who probably don't care about the product you're trying to build, nor will they ever play it through, and then persuading them to give you some money based on a 5 to 10 page presentation. It's tricky and it's hard and it's very time consuming and it's very expensive to be able to raise money from VCs. So the idea that NFT we found has introduced is the notion of being able to raise for a product or a project specifically from the community of individuals who will be using that project. So what we have here, in fact, what we're streaming is what we call the Dragonfly Social Club. This is an experience that was built 90 days after closing, after selling out the NFT sale, which effectively has been co-created between the founders of Frogland, between Dave and his team, and with our community, which are some very, very skillful individuals, from content creators to artists to musicians, who all have an active desire to spend time in an online shared persistent space in a metaverse. So now, for the first time, we're able to generate high fidelity content, such as the stuff that you're seeing here, in record time. We actually released this playable demo to our community within 90 short days of closing the funding. And this has been an interesting process, because everything that you see inside this social club here, from the murder mystery item, has all derived from content created by the community, insofar as we have D&D sessions inside a Discord where we get content and ideas. And then for users to be able to purchase a frog and then be able to walk around a 3D environment that they recognize these small items that they had an aspect of contributing to, it warms the heart. It's a very nice way to be able to work with a community to build a product that ultimately that community themselves are going to use. So we mentioned Frogland because, of course, this is an area for frogs, but we've also partnered with a number of the sort of some of the better projects out in the NFT space to design districts that follow the aesthetic and the feel and the lore of those specific projects. And of course, with Dave and his incredible experience with gamification, being able to pull this into a gamified space. So it's not just an empty void reliant on users to provide the engagement in the activity, but instead it is very much a gamified space. You allow people to have a lot more fun on these online shared persistent spaces. So in effect, it's a fascinating way to be able to raise funds. And as any game development studio would probably attest to, it is a painful process raising the traditional way. So NFTs have really brought out an entirely new mechanic to be able to raise from a community of individuals who want to use the product that you're building, but also help you build that product with feedback, with contributions, be it from audio or from visual aspects, to the extent that even if we walk through next door, you can see up on the walls a bunch of paintings that have been all submitted from our community members. So it's a really, really nice way to work with a community to build a product that ultimately the community will end up using themselves.
It's a really positive way of looking at it in terms of, you know, getting the contributors to then improve the product and feed into it. Dave sort of made a reference to crowdfunding earlier. One of the problems with crowdfunding is that you've got to keep feeding the beast. You've got to keep delivering and keep consumers happy. It might be too early to say, but do you get a sense that this sort of NFT model is a good long-term model, or are we not sure yet?
I believe that it very much is. An important way that we're designing this metaverse is with transparency, effectively not scurrying behind closed doors, building a product, then hoping people are going to like what we built. Instead, this is an iterative process where every step of the way we're working with our community, almost like beta testers, if you will. So they're able to see the initial concept art, they're able to give us feedback on what they feel it should moving, in which direction. And this is ultimately how we determined the 1920s gangster frogs. This is really the idea that stemmed from our community. And with that, provided we continue to show updates and we continue to show progress, the model that we built for Frogland specifically is the idea to never rely on institutional finance. We will fund and continue to fund this world with what are called land sales. So effectively, at a point in time, we'll introduce a land sale for land around the Dragonfly Social Club, for instance. And this will allow us to raise funds, and the funds raised will go back towards the development of the project. And the model that we have will scale both with the community as well as with the technology. So as the space continues to grow and as new projects pop up and they join this ecosystem, it brings in more narrative and more creativity and more gamified states, almost like your DLC to a video game that's provided for free for those members and allows us to continue to grow while the space grows in general. So it's, in my opinion, the next step past Kickstarter, because you're not just raising a bunch of cash to build a prototype and then relying on VC funding. You have a model that you can work with a community directly one-on-one, of what I like to call a wallet-to-wallet transaction that allows us to continue to grow this space without ever needing to rely on the middlemen, these board execs who don't really care about the product we're trying to build.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. Go on, Dave. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, without it, I mean, I've got our core team all come from PlayStation. We've worked together there for years. I mean, some of them I worked with for over 20 years with them, right? And I when we started this project, I said, "Hey guys, look, you know how we used to do those pitches to the execs? It's like, well, forget that. We've actually got this direct relationship with the players, and so this is it. It's really down to us. We've got to work out what they want and keep them happy and occupied and excited, and on the journey as well. And as you say, like the Kickstarter model of having to show progress. It is a little bit like the VC model. I'm not complaining about that, but sometimes you need to make a different change and different direction. But this community come with us on that. And so, there's town halls every week. We share making ofs and updates. We can share very early sketches to get feedback rather than kind of building a lot of very polished content. I mean, in a way, it's interesting, like with David's presentation, which is, getting the core gameplay right and relatively simple sort of card mechanics rather than building 3D spaces. We're looking at this, well, we're making high-end 3D spaces, but we're not doing them over years. We're doing them over days and weeks, so it's not like crazy development, but then we're giving people a place to go and hang out. We're finding out what they like to do when they're in there. And then we can expand on that. And I find that it's really been refreshing as a project. I have to say, our team are loving it. It's really exciting. The frog noir, as we call it, art style has gone down really well. And yeah, we're just keen to keep progressing and actually building out the world. We've got quite a few people from PlayStation Home, so they really have got experiences. PlayStation Home's like classic Sony. Let's build this thing 10 years too early and then close it just before it becomes massive. I've seen it before with Sony. I love Sony, but just a little moan. But having their experience as well of how people in like a persistent world want to share their time and share their experiences, it's coming at it a slightly different angle. Again, I agree with David. It's not the same as making a Tomb Raider game where you'd make the Dragonfly Club and you'd go through it in 10 seconds and you might notice the dice on the table and then just run past because you've killed everybody and it's all part of the narrative arc or whatever. For us, it's like, oh no, this is the clubhouse. This is where people come. This is the Discord community, but in 3D where you can actually find other people who've got frogs and talk about them and then play dice together or find out the murder mystery or read the paper in Frogland. And so it's just such a different way of working, but so far very enjoyable.
Well, people love being in a club as well, don't they? So that does make sense. Interesting though, you talk about the whole sort of consumer engagement piece and how they're reacting to it. Dave, on the, there are negative sides of that as well. There's been lots of reports about the impact that these kinds of technologies have on the environment, for instance. I'm not an expert in this kind of evidence. Do you have a view on that? Oh yeah, I mean, I do want to do the right thing for the environment, and I think that's important. We know that there are a number of blockchain technologies now that are much more energy efficient. So, we're very keen to move to those at the right moment. So Ethereum 2, for example, is much more efficient than Ethereum 1. We know that we're working in Ethereum 1 at the moment. We are still fairly small. So I don't feel that we're actually, the actual amount of damage we've done is pretty limited. I mean, I'm going to GDC in a month. I am taking a plane. I feel bad about it, especially after the last 2 years. But yeah, essentially, I am confident that we will move to a much more energy efficient blockchain. I think there are some issues, as Peter said at the top. And I think at the moment, we're kind of conflating a number of things and we need to separate them out. So there are bad actors in this space. There were bad actors in the early YouTube space, right? Nobody cared about music licensing and people's music was getting ripped off and whatever else. And that's now all changed, right? So we need to, I appreciate there's regulation coming, but I also think that's a very positive thing because it will, prevent bad actors and scams and so on. And it's a technology, it's how you use it. I want to use it for good. We're not glorifying violence in Frogland. We're making a nice community of people with interesting narratives, and it's an entertainment platform. That's my sort of feeling. And in terms of the general NFT space, I used to buy games and then trade them in. I can't do that with my virtual goods. I actually think, I might buy some virtual goods. I might sell them at a loss, but if I've enjoyed having them and I've enjoyed playing with them, I think that's fine. And I might sell them at a profit. I've got an original copy of Wipeout. It's probably worth a bit of money now. So, I think that side of it is I have less concern around. Well, let's talk. Can we talk about the consumers a little bit more, if that's okay? So, there has been a mixed consumer response to this technology. There's no doubt about it. But you generally hear about the polarized views. Some are totally in favour and some are very much against it. It's what you get, isn't it? But what do you think? I mean, if you are obviously dealing with players and addressing them all the time, what do you think is in it for a player?
Yeah, go on. You go for it, Ed.
No, sorry, thank you. I just want to touch upon very briefly an important point that you mentioned. Certainly, the environmental impact of blockchain that consumers may be somewhat concerned about. But I think it's essential to distinguish between the electricity consumption and the environmental footprint. The first concerns the total amount of electricity being used in mining processes, while the latter concerns environmental implications of mining itself. And usually what matters for the environment is not the level of electrical consumption per se, but is the carbon intensity of the energy sources used to generate that electricity. For example, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity generated from a coal-fired power station has substantially worse environmental footprint than 1 kilowatt hour of electricity produced on a wind farm. So let's just assume for a moment that all of this energy comes from coal, the most polluting fossil fuel, and is generated by one of the most least efficient coal-fired power plants. In a worst case scenario, the entire Bitcoin network would be responsible for about 111 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions, accounting for approximately 1/3 of 1% of the world's total yearly emissions. So you really need to put things into context here. I mean, when we look at sort of HSBC, who've recently funded over $8 billion in new oil and gas, and in 21, Barclays, $4.5 billion, and Deutsche Bank, $5.5 billion, it puts things slightly more into perspective. So consumers are certainly picking up on some things that are out there, but I think when you look at the grand scheme of things, this is a very important thing to think about. That this is an emerging technology. As Dave's mentioned, there are layer 2 solutions that are coming out that reduce the footprint that much further. And from a consumer, I don't think that should be a reason to not support this. I think certainly when consumers realize this isn't just another way for the large companies to screw you out of more money for loot boxes, but instead it provides the power for the users to own digital assets. An example I like to use is the money spent on skins in Fortnite. Let's say Epic shuts that game down at some point. That's a sunk cost. You can't get access to those skins nor that money back. However, had those skins been NFTs, having ownership in the hands of the users, if that game were to get shut down and a new game were to open up that supported NFTs, then effectively you can move that skin from one to another. So I see this as empowering technology for consumers and one that really should be paid attention to.
What I was going to say is to back that up really is, so there was a time in about 2005 when the head of Sony Studios, Phil Harrison at the time, said, what we're going to do, we're going to sell virtual goods. And I can remember we were like, what? Who's going to buy a virtual t-shirt? Who's going to buy a cap or whatever? And, and that's when you got like PlayStation Home started doing those sorts of things, and with some moderate success. And now that's pretty big, right? You can buy virtual FIFA cards, there's billions of dollars. And actually, those are sunk costs. I'm now a parent. I wasn't back then, or was just a parent back then. I'm now a parent, and I'm literally sinking money into Fortnite and other games. As Ed said, if I can then resell them, if I get into, let's say I got into Fortnite early on, it was an NFT game, and I bought one of the first skins, and it was only 500, and now that's worth a lot of money. Brilliant. I've created an asset, I can sell it, I've made some money. Just like I might have a first edition, first Pokemon game or something like that, and that's now worth more money. But equally, I might have bought skins or stuff for my son, and he's no longer playing that game, he's moved on to another one. And even if I can port them, even if I couldn't port them into another game, if I can then resell them and get some money back, great. Just like I might sell last year's FIFA, in a secondhand games store. I think that's really value add for the players. I actually think that way back when, the step for players to go from no digital goods to digital goods is quite a big one, and it's there now. I mean, anyone under 20 doesn't really notice that, but then for them to go from those digital goods to have a sense of ownership is a much smaller step. And I think that's a benefit to the consumer. We're just saying, and actually there's a record outside the walled garden that publisher has of that game where you own that digital asset. And I think that's a positive thing.
So I'm going to ask two more questions, if that's okay. The final one, I like to tease these things up, will be sort of your, as Dave Amor had his sort of future vision there at the end, which I thought was rather nice. I'm going to ask you for your sort of future vision of this technology. What's the future opportunities? But prior to that, Ed, you mentioned about taking your digital asset, and Dave, you agree with that, having your digital character and reselling it. But Ed, you were talking about taking a character, a skin, and moving it into different products and taking it with you as you go. I understand well, firstly, is that actually possible technologically? And second, is it actually viable or realistic when you consider all the different platforms and different games content? Or is that actually something that could happen?
I believe it absolutely is something that could and most likely will happen. What we're lacking presently is unified standards that developers already love and embrace. But I think we're in a very early stage. And provided there is interest, I believe the utility will then follow. So with Frogland ourselves, after purchasing one of these Frogland NFTs, you'll get a notorious frog, that will ultimately become a playable character inside a space. But from a technical level in our metaverse, the view is to allow users to import NFTs of a variety of different models and formats. So if you wanted to, let's say, exhibit your 3D model of an NFT inside your personal space, what we call a PAD, a personal access domain, that would be entirely possible, and it would allow you to bring in an NFT from entirely outside of the Frogland ecosystem and be able to showcase that in some capacity. As the utility of these NFTs evolve and they become more playable characters, so to speak, or usable skins, absolutely. We see from a technical level, it's simply a matter of importing a new 3D model. And if that 3D model is an avatar that's been rigged and animated, then fantastic. That's an item that could be used inside a game world. So we're trying to open up these standards so that developers will be able to build a model in Maya, in Blender, for instance, and be able to import it and then use it as an item inside this space that was not curated or developed by the development team itself. So we're starting to sort of move that barrier forwards. With what we're doing here is really focusing on being the first movers on a new space. And I see these metaverses very much like social media platforms, effectively a transition from a 2D social media platform to a 3D social media platform. These are communication platforms that people can talk to one another in, and with that, they want to be able to share just as they can in a two-dimensional capacity. So to be able to do that in a 3D realm, I think makes a lot of sense, and it's an inevitability. It's just a matter of time for everyone to catch up. So certainly with what we're doing at Frogland, with Dave and with the rest of the team, and we have some incredible award-winning Hollywood artists and pioneers from Silicon Valley and Web3, the idea here is to set a new foundation for people to be able to build off of that will stand the test of time as this space continues to grow.
It's really interesting. Yeah, go on, Dave. Yeah.
Like, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, you'd get a Hotmail address or an email address, and you could probably only use it inside one place. But now, obviously, you can import an email address to many different mail clients and so on. And actually, your avatar, I think, is your new email address. It's just a synchronous one.
That's a really interesting concept. It's going to take some cooperation between some of these platforms to allow it. It'd be fascinating to see how quickly they do it, but it only takes one or two, and then the rest will have to follow. That'll be the fascinating thing, won't it?
Avatars, we'll probably end up with 4 or 5, maybe 2. I mean, it might be VHS and Betamax of avatars. Do you know what I mean? But it's going to be, avatar standards or something. But I think we'll get there.
I do see these profile picture projects, these avatars, as in essence, a new digital identity. I think what we'll see with what Facebook will roll out with their upcoming metaverse will be very much a recreation of reality as we know it, as opposed to what we're trying to do in Frogland, which is effectively build an escape from reality. The nuances that Facebook of relying users to use a Facebook account to attach to their Oculus device, in essence, removes that level of anonymity away. And I think that certainly this space that is rapidly growing, we're seeing a lot of individuals who are more in the Web3 mindset of, yes, I'll share a wallet address, but I don't necessarily want to share my personal details. And this is a very big change, I think, that we're seeing in Web3 that should be embraced rather than rejected. But with Web3, I think we're seeing a lot of the content creators who have seen where some of the larger Web2 companies may have gone wrong, and they're looking for change. They're looking for something different. So to take this technology and simply apply it in the old-fashioned way of things, the Web2 way of things, I don't think is the correct way forwards. But obviously, that's what a lot of Web2 companies will do because that's all they know. What really excites me about this space is we're now seeing content creators flow into an emerging technology space, which we never have for 3D TVs. We never have for virtual reality. This is the first piece of emerging tech that I've lived through that we're seeing sophisticated content creators spending time and energy to build content in a new platform. And that to me is an absolute game changer. So I do believe these PFPs are digital identities inside this new internet, this 3D version of the internet that Web3 is about to introduce.
Well, I asked for a view of the future. I think you've just given it, Ed, but is there anything else that's sort of exciting you? What are the things that are really going to drive this forward and keep us entertained?
It's the co-creation of narrative and utility, in my opinion. While yes, we have sort of some incredible members who work for Disney and Pixar and LucasArts and working on some of the greatest movies and experiences that everyone's probably known and loved for many years now, they've seen the potential that this technology can introduce. And so to be able to work with highly skilled individuals, but also with a community of passionate members that want to see a better world evolve in front of them, it is a force to be reckoned with. And when you realize that what scales with complexity, what scales with resource with these larger corporations is the complexity, it means that these Web3 startups have an opportunity to build better and faster with a community than any people with the bureaucracy and red tape are simply unable to deliver on. And I think we demonstrated that quite quickly, where we went from concept to a full playable experience that, in my opinion, is more polished than some of the other experiences out there, that is built in 90 days. And that has been built with the support of the community of effectively investors. And this has been just an absolute game changer. And so far, I've never been able to build or have as much fun as I have been for the past year, having worked initially on some of the early projects back in February of last year, working on some of the largest and best-selling NFT collections of all time, all the way through to now building Frogland itself. It is just it's a paradigm shift, the likes of before I've never seen.
I don't know how you got through that, Ed, without saying leapfrog.
Oh.
Anyway, we're leapfrogging the competition.
I'll mute you, Dave, if you crack any more jokes. No, listen, this is the end. Take us home, Dave.
I always like to look to the past to see the future, and I think one thing I've recently been just as a different project. I've been just looking at something about Bertha Benz, who's married to Carl Benz, who created the first motor car. And she was the first person to do a long distance journey in the motor car. She's like 100 miles over several days and weeks, whatever. And most people that encountered her thought the car was the work of the devil. Right. And so I think that, some of not all, that we do need to have a sensible approach and due diligence, the technology and the actors within it. But however, I do think that there's a bit of that sort of, it's the work of the devil. I don't know what this thing is, this horseless carriage that's coming. And we need to get through that and explain to people. So that's one point. And then the second point, I think, is when we saw free to play come into games, it was a sort of similar vibe actually to now. And I think a few of us have seen that and been part of that, where people, this is weird. And also people taking, as David said, taking existing console game mechanics and trying to put them onto a phone where, virtual joysticks and 20-minute or half-hour game sessions and those things. And it just needs to change. And we need to try things and find what works in that new space. And I think that's where we're going with this. I remember seeing the graph of how much you can spend on free to play and going, this is crazy. Who's going to spend, $30,000 in Clash of Clans every year or something? But some people want to do that, and we allow them. And actually, provided they're not messing their lives up, and we put guardrails in on that, that's fine. And some people can play it for nothing, and that's also fine. And I think that's where we'll get to with NFTs. It will be, some people want to spend more money, want to get in early, buy NFTs at a certain price and really help shape the product. And then others will come in later and just enjoy it as it kind of broadens out. And I think so long as we use genuine ethics around that, I think that's absolutely fine. And it's an exciting place to be.
Yeah, you've both said this is going to be a fun development, and that's what we want. We're in the entertainment industry after all. Yeah. So fabulous. And thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today and answering those questions. In fact, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today: Peter, Tom, James, David, Dave, and Ed. Thank you very much for giving up your time and sharing your insight with us. Most of all, I want to thank our attendees for joining us and listening to this interesting session. A video link will be sent to you afterwards so that you can relive it and share it with your colleagues, and I'll try and get some text in there about the questions that were asked. A lot of content to cover today, so really appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining us. Check out the rest of the Hub Crawl events and hope to see you in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.